Daniel Brooks had taught himself a hard lesson over the years. The worst moments in a man's life rarely arrived with warning. They came disguised as ordinary nights, ordinary streets, ordinary choices. One second, everything looked familiar. The next, the ground beneath his feet was gone. That was what Daniel was thinking about nothing at all as he drove home after a late shift. His hands sore from loading freight, his mind already on the little things waiting for him at home. He still needed to sign Ethan's school permission slip. He still needed to set out the lunch money for the field trip his son had reminded him about twice before bed. He still needed to heat up whatever leftovers were in the fridge and sleep a few hours before doing it all again. Then he saw them. A woman sat hunched beneath a flickering street lamp on the side of the road, hugging herself against the cold. Beside her, a little girl with a pink backpack was asleep on her shoulder, curled into the kind of exhausted silence no child should ever know. Daniel almost drove past. He would later wonder what made him stop. Maybe it was the child's thin coat. Maybe it was the way the woman kept looking over her shoulder like she expected danger to rise out of the dark. He pulled over, stepped into the bitter wind, and started toward them. Then the woman lifted her head. Daniel froze so hard it felt as if the cold had moved inside his chest. It was Rachel, the wife who had walked out of his life years ago and never come back. If stories about family, second chances, and the kind of love that survives real pain mean something to you, take a second to subscribe and stay with this channel. There's always another story waiting, and sometimes the one that finds you changes more than you expected. For a second, neither of them moved. Rachel looked nothing like the woman Daniel remembered. The Rachel in his memory had laughed with her whole face, had sung badly in the kitchen while making pancakes on Sunday mornings, had once painted the nursery wall 3 different shades of blue because she could not decide which one felt warm enough for a baby. The woman in front of him now was thinner, sharper around the cheeks, and so worn down she seemed to hold herself together by force. Her coat was wrinkled and too light for the weather. Her eyes darted past him toward the street and then back again, full of the kind of vigilance that never really rested. "Daniel," she said. His name sounded wrong in her mouth after all these years. Too familiar, too late. The little girl stirred and made a sleepy sound. Daniel looked down at her, 5, maybe 6 years old, small for her age. Her braids were uneven, and one shoelace hung loose. She was still asleep, but one tiny hand had a fistful of Rachel's sleeve, as if she had learned not to let go, even in sleep. "What are you doing here?" Daniel asked. Rachel swallowed. "Please don't yell." The request made something bitter flash through him. He had not raised his voice, but suddenly he wanted to. Wanted to ask where she had been when Ethan had the flu at 4 in the morning. Wanted to ask where she had been when their son cried in the dark, and asked whether his mother even remembered what his face looked like. Wanted to ask how a person could vanish and still expect softness from the man she left behind. "I'm not yelling," he said, his voice low and hard. "I'm asking what you're doing here." Rachel tightened her arm around the sleeping child. "I just need one night." Daniel laughed once without humor. "One night. I don't have anywhere else to go." "That sounds like your problem." Rachel flinched, but she did not argue. She only looked back toward the road again, and Daniel saw something in that glance that gave him pause. Not shame, not manipulation, fear. Real fear lived in the body. It showed up in a person's shoulders, in the way they listened to silence, in the way they could not stop scanning exits. Daniel had spent years learning to read children, and fear looked the same whether it lived in a child or an adult. Rachel was afraid of something, or someone, and whatever it was had followed her all the way into the way she breathed. The little girl woke then, blinking slowly. She looked at Daniel without smiling, without crying, simply watching him with grave, guarded eyes. Children were usually curious around strangers. This one looked practiced. She looked like a child who had already learned that every new person might matter in ways she could not control. "Is she sick?" Daniel asked. Rachel shook her head. "No, just tired." "She's freezing." "I know. He looked up and down the street. Empty sidewalks, darkened storefronts, a bus stop bench tagged with graffiti. Somewhere far away, a siren rose and faded. "Call a shelter," he said. Rachel's head snapped up. "No!" "Why not?" "Please," she said, and there was a tremor in her voice now. "Not here." Daniel stared at her. She was asking him for something he did not owe her. Less than that. She was asking him to reopen a door he had spent years nailing shut. He should have turned around. He should have gotten back in the car and gone home to the only life that mattered now. Then the little girl's chin dipped against Rachel's shoulder, and Daniel saw how badly she was shivering. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. Rachel hesitated. That was answer enough. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second and felt the shape of the mistake he was about to make. When he opened them again, he was already defeated by the sight of the child. "One night," he said. "You tell me what this is, and then tomorrow you leave." Rachel nodded too fast, as if she had expected him to say no until the very last second. "Okay." Daniel bent and picked up the pink backpack because he needed his hands to do something besides clench. It was almost weightless. The little girl climbed into the back seat with Rachel and tucked herself close to her mother. During the drive, Rachel kept glancing out the rear window. Daniel noticed but said nothing. He noticed everything despite himself. The child's too small coat, Rachel's split knuckle, the bruise yellowing under the cuff of her sleeve. The whole car felt crowded with questions he did not want answers to. He drove to the apartment where he and Ethan lived, parked behind the building, and led them upstairs in silence. The hallway smelled like old carpet and bleach. Mrs. Kemp in 2B still had her television on loud enough to hear through the wall. Ordinary sounds, ordinary place. Daniel unlocked the apartment and stepped inside first. Home looked exactly as it should have. Ethan's sneakers by the door, a permission slip on the kitchen counter, a cardboard model of the solar system tilting against the bookshelf where his son had left it after school. Rachel's gaze moved over every familiar thing like she was standing inside a life she had forfeited. "Sit," Daniel said. The little girl perched on the edge of the couch, backpack still on her lap, while Rachel stood near the door as if she did not trust herself to take up more space than necessary. Daniel turned the heat up and put water on for tea because it gave his anger somewhere to go. "What's her name?" he asked. Rachel looked at the child before answering. "Sophie." Daniel repeated it once under his breath. Sophie did not answer. She only watched him with those solemn eyes. He was about to demand the truth right there when a small voice came from the hallway. "Dad?" Daniel turned so fast the spoon in his hand hit the counter. Ethan stood there in mismatched pajamas, rubbing one eye. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's mouth, a fact Daniel usually tried not to notice. At 8 years old, Ethan had already learned to read a room too well. "Why are there people here?" he asked. Rachel made a sound like she had forgotten how to breathe. Daniel set the spoon down. "Buddy, you should be asleep." But Ethan did not move. His gaze went from Daniel to Rachel and stayed there. Children recognized truth long before they had language for it. Daniel saw something unsettled move across his son's face. "Do I know her?" Ethan asked. Daniel crossed the room and crouched in front of him. "Come sit at the table." Ethan resisted just enough to make his meaning clear. He wanted an answer first. Daniel kept his voice steady. "Please." That at least Ethan could still obey. He walked to the kitchen table and climbed into his chair. Sophie pulled her legs up beneath her on the couch and shrank closer to Rachel. Daniel sat across from his son. "The woman in the living room is Rachel," he said. Ethan frowned faintly, then looked toward the couch again. The name was not familiar in the way it should have been. There had been no photographs in the apartment for years. Daniel had taken them down not out of spite, but because survival demanded it. Yet children held on to absences like they were objects. Ethan had asked about his mother enough times for the shape of the missing person to remain in the room, even when no one said her name. "Rachel," Ethan repeated. "My mom?" Daniel forced himself to nod. The question that followed had lived in the apartment for years, even when unspoken. Why is she here now? Daniel did not know how to answer in a way an 8-year-old could carry. Because she left. Because the world was ugly. Because adults could fail children so badly it changed them forever. She needs help tonight, he said. That's all you have to worry about right now. Ethan looked down at his hands. Did she know where we lived? The silence that followed was too long. Ethan's face changed. Not anger, hurt. Rachel covered her mouth. Daniel wanted to protect his son from the full truth, but children had a brutal instinct for what adults did not want to say. He reached across the table, but Ethan tucked his hands into his lap. Go back to bed, Daniel said softly. We'll talk more tomorrow. Instead, Ethan got down from the chair and walked toward the couch. He stopped a few feet away from Rachel. Daniel could see the hope battling with caution on his son's face, and it made him feel sick. Hi, Ethan said. Rachel's eyes filled instantly. Hi, sweetheart. Daniel closed his eyes for half a beat. Sweetheart. The word fell into the room as if years had not happened. Ethan looked at Sophie next. Hi. Sophie gave the smallest nod. Then Ethan shuffled back down the hallway and disappeared into his room. When his door clicked shut, Daniel turned on Rachel. You should have told me before he saw you. I know. No, Daniel snapped. You don't. Sophie flinched at the sharpness in his voice. Daniel saw it immediately and hated that she had. He drew a slow breath and turned away before his anger made him cruel in front of a child. Rachel lowered herself onto the couch and wrapped an arm around Sophie. Daniel poured tea he did not want, set a mug in front of Rachel, and mixed cocoa into another for the girl. Sophie looked at the mug as if she was not sure it truly belonged to her until Rachel nodded. You have until morning, Daniel said. Then I want the truth. Rachel met his eyes over the child's bowed head. You'll have it. He did not believe her, but there was nowhere else for the night to go. Morning came gray and cold. Daniel had not slept. He sat at the kitchen table with coffee gone lukewarm in his mug while the apartment slowly woke around him. Pipes knocked. The radiator hissed. Sophie made a frightened little sound in her sleep when Rachel got up to use the bathroom, and Rachel hurried back before the girl fully opened her eyes. Ethan came out dressed for school, carrying his spelling notebook. He stopped when he saw Rachel still there, and whatever small hope he had gone to bed with seemed to sober into caution. Daniel made cereal for both children. Ethan started eating right away. Sophie did not touch hers until she saw him take the first bite. Rachel noticed. So did Daniel. Talk, he said. Rachel looked at the children. Not all of this in front of them. Enough of it. She sat down opposite them, folding her hands tightly. I left because I made mistakes, she said. Ethan frowned. Daniel said nothing. Rachel kept her eyes on the table. After things got hard between your father and me, after money got tight and we were both tired all the time, I leaned on the wrong person. A man named Wade Collier. At first he acted like he wanted to help. He paid bills when I was scared. He listened when I was overwhelmed. Then he started deciding everything. Daniel's jaw tightened. So there it was. Not all of it, but the shape of the rot. He checked my phone, Rachel said. He watched where I went. He knew your dad's job, Ethan's daycare, our routines. When I tried to pull away, he made it clear he could make life very hard for everyone I loved. Ethan's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Did he hurt you? Rachel's face crumpled. Sometimes. Daniel stepped in before more spilled into his son's morning than it should have. Eat. But Ethan was listening with that careful stillness children used when they knew the world had tilted and adults were pretending it hadn't. Rachel looked at Daniel then, as if she understood the hardest part was still in front of her. I found out I was pregnant after I tried to leave him, she said. The room went completely still. Daniel's mind refused to move at first. Pregnant. The word floated there, disconnected from the child at his table. Then Rachel turned her face slightly towards Sophie, and everything in him went cold. She's yours, Daniel. The spoon slipped from Ethan's hand and clinked into his bowl. Daniel stood up so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. Sophie froze, eyes wide. He looked at her then, really looked. The shape of her brow, the left-handed grip on the spoon, the way she pressed her mouth tight when frightened. Not a mirror of him, worse than that, an echo. Enough resemblance to make 5 lost years hit him all at once. "She's my sister?" Ethan asked. No one answered immediately. Daniel dragged a hand over his mouth. "Get your coat," he told Ethan. "Dad!" "Now!" Ethan obeyed because children always obeyed the wrong things when adults made them afraid. Daniel turned back to Rachel. "When did you know?" "Before she was born." "And you never told me." "I was trying to keep you safe." "That was not your decision." Rachel's eyes filled. "Wade already knew enough to scare me. He had started asking about your work, about Ethan. I thought if I came back to you, he'd punish all of us." "So your answer was to erase me." She flinched. "I wrote letters. I drove past your job once. I stood there with Sophie in the car and couldn't make myself cross the street. You let me lose my daughter before I even knew I had one." Sophie made a tiny sound at the word daughter. Daniel heard it and hated himself for speaking too sharply in front of her, but the pain was moving too fast now to shape properly. He took Ethan to school in a silence so tight it felt loud. Halfway there, Ethan finally whispered, "She looks scared." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah." At the school drop-off line, he put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Listen to me. Nothing changes you and me. You understand?" Ethan nodded, though not fully convinced. As he got out, he paused and looked back in. "If she's my sister, can you not yell at her too much?" Daniel almost asked which she Ethan meant. Then he realized the answer did not matter. When he returned to the apartment, Rachel was standing at the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see outside. "How did he find you this time?" Daniel asked. Rachel sat at the table and told him. "Motels, cash payments, different last names, short stays. Sophie out of school for stretches because Rachel was afraid records would leave a trail. A motel clerk who recognized her from somewhere else. Wade pounding on the door 2 nights before, leaving before police arrived. Rachel had run because she believed he would come back. Daniel wrote down what he could on a legal pad because he needed to turn chaos into something structured. The more Rachel talked, the clearer Wade's pattern became. He did not need one dramatic confrontation. He wanted pressure, repetition, enough fear to convince a person she would never truly escape. Rachel had barely finished explaining when someone pounded on the apartment door. Sophie jumped so hard the couch cushion shifted under her. "Mom!" Rachel went white. Daniel felt his own pulse kick into his throat. The pounding came again, slow and deliberate this time. "Daniel," Rachel whispered, "don't open it." He moved in front of the door anyway, one hand lifted behind him for Rachel to take Sophie down the hall. "Bedroom," he said. Sophie would not let go of the back of his shirt. Daniel crouched, forcing his voice calm. "Go with your mom. It's okay." She looked at him as if trying to decide whether grown men ever meant that phrase. Then Rachel pulled her gently away. Daniel looked through the peephole. Wade Collier stood in the hall wearing a dark jacket and an expression so controlled it made him worse. He did not look desperate. He looked entitled. Daniel kept the chain on and opened the door 2 inches. Wade smiled. "There you are." "You need to leave," Daniel said. Wade tilted his head. "So she did come running back here. This is your warning." Wade leaned just enough for the chain to tighten. "She took something that belongs to me." "Nobody belongs to you." For the first time, Wade's face hardened. "Think carefully before you decide how involved you want to get. You have a kid in here too, don't you?" Daniel went completely still. Wade saw it and smiled again, smaller this time. "Yeah, I remember. Ethan. Harrison Elementary now, right? 3rd grade?" The hallway narrowed around Daniel. "You say my son again," Daniel said quietly. And I call the police before this door shuts. Wade shrugged. Call them. By the time they get here, I'll be gone. I always am. He nodded toward the apartment. Tell Rachel to stop making this difficult. She walks out and we all save ourselves trouble. Daniel slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. His hands shook once. Then he took out his phone and called 911. The police arrived, took statements, wrote a report, promised patrols. One officer asked whether Wade had ever hurt Sophie directly. Rachel hesitated too long before answering no. The officer noticed. Daniel noticed. Everyone noticed. After they left, Rachel said what Daniel had half expected. You should make us leave. He turned to her. What? Wade came because of me, because of Sophie. Ethan shouldn't be anywhere near this. There it was. The same instinct that had destroyed everything the first time. Run, decide for everyone else, and call it protection. No, Daniel said. You do not get to disappear again and name it love. Rachel stared at him, stunned. I'm furious with you, he said. I don't know when that ends, but Sophie is my daughter. Ethan is my son, and I am not letting some man who thinks he owns people frighten you into blowing their lives apart all over again. Rachel broke then, not dramatically, not loudly, just with the exhausted collapse of someone who had been holding herself up too long. At 11:30, the school called. Ethan had a stomachache. Daniel picked him up from the nurse's office and knew the minute he saw his face that the boy was not sick so much as shaken. I tried to stay, Ethan said in the car. You don't have to prove anything. Did that man come back? Daniel did not ask how he knew. He only answered honestly enough to be kind. He came to the door. He didn't get in. The police came. When they got back, Ethan hovered in the living room doorway. Sophie sat on the couch holding one of his old coloring books. Hi, Ethan said. Sophie twisted the edge of the blue blanket he had given her the night before. Hi. Do you like coloring? She shrugged. You can use the good crayons, Ethan said, sitting on the opposite cushion. The broken red one is terrible. To Daniel's surprise, Sophie gave the smallest breath of a laugh. That afternoon, he made calls. He changed Ethan's school pickup list. He spoke directly to the principal and told her no information was to be released to anyone but him. He called his supervisor at the warehouse and took emergency leave. He wrote Wade Collier's name on a scrap of paper and folded it into his wallet like a promise. That night, after both children were asleep in the living room, Ethan on a pillow fort beside the couch because Sophie had panicked at sleeping alone, Daniel sat across from Rachel with the legal pad between them. Start from the first place after you left, he said. She did. A basement apartment in Dayton, a motel outside Columbus, 2 weeks with an old co-worker, a shelter where she used a fake last name, Sophie born in a county hospital where Rachel left the father line blank because Wade was already checking her forms, schools under borrowed addresses, jobs that never lasted because Wade found them, periods of hiding, periods of almost believing she had won. Then the inevitable reappearance. A truck across the street, a phone call from a blocked number, coffee waiting outside a door she had never told him about. Did he ever file for custody? Daniel asked. Rachel shook her head. No, he liked the threat of it more than the reality. That made awful sense. Before they stopped for the night, Daniel said, Tomorrow I'm talking to a lawyer. Rachel looked startled. A lawyer? For the threats, Daniel said. Then after a beat, and for Sophie. The name in that sentence shifted something between them. Rachel lowered her eyes. Daniel did not take it back. The next morning, they met with Sharon Bell, a family law attorney who looked like she had spent years being unimpressed by bullies. Daniel laid out the police report, the addresses, the threats, and the fact that he had only just learned Sophie was his child. Sharon listened, then said, Emergency protective action for the stalking can move quickly if the threats are documented. Paternity is a separate legal process. Do not confuse the two. We start both. That distinction mattered. Daniel clung to it because it meant one thing could happen before another was finished. Sharon turned to Rachel. Do you have any texts, voicemails, motel receipts, old screenshots? Some, not everything. We'll work with what you have. Men like this rely on confusion and shame. We stopped giving him both. For the first time in days, Daniel felt something like direction. It lasted until they got back to the apartment building and saw Wade's truck parked across the street. No one was inside. No one was visible anywhere. The truck sat there like a message. I can still reach you. Daniel got everyone back in the car and waited. 12 minutes later, the truck pulled away. That evening, Sharon recommended a retired deputy named Owen Price, who installed a camera by Daniel's front door and reinforced the frame on the cheap because, in his words, guys like this count on ordinary locks. 3 days later, Sharon called with news. The court signed a temporary protective order based on the threats and stalking history, she said. It bars Wade from contacting Rachel, approaching Sophie, coming near your apartment, and coming near Ethan's school. That doesn't solve everything, but it draws a legal line. Daniel thanked her and ended the call. Rachel was standing in the kitchen watching his face. What happened? We got it, he said. Rachel sat down as if her legs no longer trusted themselves. In the living room, Ethan looked up from the fort he and Sophie were building. Is that good? He asked. Daniel nodded. That's good. That evening, he sat both children down. This was one of the places where stories usually lied. They skipped over the careful part, the part where adults had to decide how much truth a child could safely hold. Daniel did not want to lie to Sophie anymore, but he also would not let the revelation of her father become another scene of chaos forced on her by fear. He knelt in front of her so his face was level with hers. Ethan sat close enough beside her that their shoulders nearly touched. The reason all of this matters so much, Daniel said, is because the four of us are connected more than you knew. Sophie pulled the blanket a little higher over her knees. Daniel kept his voice steady. I'm your father. The room held still. Sophie blinked once, then looked immediately at Rachel for correction. Rachel only nodded, tears already in her eyes. For real? Sophie asked. The question hit Daniel harder than anything Wade had said. For real. Sophie looked back at him. Then why didn't you come? Rachel made a broken sound. Daniel did not look away from his daughter. Because I didn't know about you. You didn't? No. Sophie turned to Rachel. You didn't tell him? Rachel bowed her head. I was scared, baby. I made wrong choices, and then I kept making them because I was afraid. Sophie went quiet. Daniel understood that silence. It was a child absorbing an adult's failure without yet knowing where to place it. He gave her the only truth he could promise. But I know now, and I'm here now. No speeches, no oversized promises, just that. Sophie studied him for several long seconds, then shifted on the couch. Not into his arms, not even close enough to call trust, but closer than before. Ethan reached across the cushion and set his hand between them like he was helping hold the moment together. The temporary order did not magically end everything. Wade tested it once with a blocked call that lasted exactly 2 rings before disconnecting. Sharon documented it. Owen saved the door camera footage when Wade's truck cruised past the building one evening without stopping. Daniel bought new curtains, changed the route he took to Ethan's school, and kept a printed copy of the order in the glove compartment. At the same time, ordinary life began pressing in again, and that turned out to be a kind of healing, too. Sophie discovered she hated oatmeal but loved strawberry jam. She lined up her shoes too neatly by the door, as if she expected to leave at any minute. She did not like loud voices, sudden knocks, or being in a room alone with the lights off. She loved coloring, but always picked up the crayon in her left hand, and every time Daniel noticed that tiny, familiar habit, it struck him fresh. Ethan, for his part, became a bridge between worlds no child should have had to bridge. He showed Sophie where the good spoons were and which step in the hallway squeaked. He explained that Mrs. Kemp in 2B smelled like peppermint and shouted at game shows even when she was winning. He told Sophie the broken red crayon was still terrible, but blue was reliable. Once, when Daniel found them building a fort from couch cushions for the third time that week, Ethan looked up and asked, "Does this mean we're really brother and sister now?" Sophie answered before any adult could. "I think we always were." Daniel had to step into the kitchen for a minute after that and pretend he was looking for paper towels. Rachel changed too, though not in some neat storybook way. She did not become easy to forgive, and Daniel did not become eager to forgive her. Trust did not regrow because two frightened people wanted it to. But she stopped hiding behind silence. She gave Sharon every document she could find. She answered Daniel's questions directly, even when the answers made her look small. She apologized to Ethan not once but many times, never demanding absolution, only telling the truth. One night, Ethan asked her, "Why didn't you think Dad could help?" Rachel sat very still for a long moment before saying, "Because I got used to fear making my decisions for me." Daniel heard that from the kitchen and understood it was the cleanest explanation she had ever given. A week later, they went to court again. Not for a miracle, just for another step. Sharon filed the paternity petition. Daniel understood that biology and paperwork were not the same thing, but he also understood the power of having both eventually say what should have been said from the beginning. Sophie was his child, and no one got to erase that anymore. Afterward, they stopped at a diner because Ethan was hungry, and Sophie had pointed solemnly at the pie case through the window. The four of them sat in a booth that was too small. Ethan talked about a science project. Sophie picked at her grilled cheese and listened. Rachel wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked, for the first time since Daniel had seen her under that street lamp, like someone whose body was beginning to believe rest might exist. Daniel did not mistake the moment for a solved life. Too much had happened. Too much remained broken. Rachel caught him looking and asked quietly, "Are we ever going to be a family again?" Daniel thought about that carefully. The younger version of himself would have heard only the question of romance in it. The current version knew better. "We already are a family," he said. "That doesn't mean we go back to what we were." Rachel lowered her eyes and nodded. The answer hurt, but it was honest. Months of damage could not be turned into healing by a single legal order or a few careful conversations. But the house felt different now, safer, truer. Sophie eventually stopped sleeping with her shoes on. Ethan stopped watching the door every time someone walked past in the hallway. Daniel learned that Sophie liked bedtime stories read twice because the first time she listened and the second time she relaxed. Rachel found part-time work at a church office and came home tired in the ordinary way, not the hunted way. Owen still checked the building from time to time. Sharon still handled the paperwork. Wade remained out there somewhere, but farther, quieter, fenced off by a record that would only get heavier if he tested it again. One Saturday morning, Daniel stood in the kitchen making pancakes while Ethan argued that he deserved the biggest one because he was older, and Sophie argued that he was only older by not that much. Rachel leaned against the counter with a half-smile that looked unfamiliar because it had no fear inside it. For a second, the scene hurt. Not because it was false, because it was real, and because real things were what had been stolen from him all those years. First words, fevers, lost teeth, tiny shoes by the door, all the ordinary moments that built a father's life. Then Sophie looked up from the table and said, "Dad, Ethan took the syrup again." The word stopped him. Dad. She had tested it softly a few times over the past weeks, never sure if it would land right. This time she said it like it belonged. Daniel turned with the spatula still in his hand. "There are 2 syrup bottles in this house," he said. Ethan grinned. "Not if I hide one." Sophie laughed, a real laugh this time, and Rachel covered her mouth because the sound still made her emotional. Daniel set the pancakes down and looked at all of them. The son he had raised, the daughter he had nearly lost without ever knowing, the woman who had once broken him, and now sat in the wreckage trying day by day to become someone more honest inside it. He understood then that some losses could not be repaired. Time did not return what it took. But love, when it was brave enough, could still build something after devastation. Not the old thing. Never the old thing. Something new. Something humbler and more hard-won. Something true. And maybe that was the better miracle. If this story stayed with you, maybe the deepest lesson is this. Love is not only about who we cherish when life is easy, but who we choose to protect when the truth becomes painful. Fear, silence, and pride can break a family apart for years, but honesty, courage, and responsibility can begin to build something back, slowly, imperfectly, but for real. And sometimes, even when we cannot recover the time that was lost, we can still decide what kind of love will shape the time we have left. If stories like this touch your heart, subscribe and stay with the channel. There will always be another story, and maybe the next one will speak to a part of your life too.